Mind evidence, where psychology becomes understanding.
In the late 1970s and continuing into the early 1990s, a series of crimes unfolded largely unnoticed in the city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Young men began to disappear. Most of them belonged to marginalized communities, and their absence initially attracted little public attention. For years, the cases were not connected. There were no clear patterns, no immediate alarms, and no widespread investigation. But behind closed doors, a hidden reality was taking shape. Between 1978 and 1991, Jeffrey Dahmer murdered 17 young men and boys. He often met his victims in bars or public places, luring them with promises of money, alcohol, or companionship. Once isolated, his crimes followed a disturbing and repetitive pattern involving control, confinement, and total domination over the victim. Dahmer's actions revealed not impulsive violence, but a structured and ritualistic behavior, driven by obsession rather than rage. The case came to light in 1991, when one intended victim managed to escape and alert the police. What officers discovered inside Dahmer's apartment shocked the world and exposed years of unnoticed crimes. Unlike the common image of a violent predator, Jeffrey Dahmer appeared socially withdrawn, quiet, and emotionally detached. He showed little outward aggression and often described himself as lonely and disconnected. And this is where psychology becomes essential, because understanding Jeffrey Dahmer requires looking beyond the crimes themselves to examine the profound psychological disturbances, compulsions, and emotional deficits that shaped his behavior. In 1992, Jeffrey Dahmer was convicted of multiple counts of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He died on November 28, 1994, at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin, after being killed by another inmate. Jeffrey Dahmer did not fit the stereotype of the explosive or outwardly violent criminal. He was quiet, withdrawn, often described as socially invisible. To understand Dahmer, we must look beyond the crimes themselves and examine a mind shaped by profound isolation, emotional fragmentation, and compulsive inner drives. At the psychological core of Jeffrey Dahmer's life was chronic loneliness. Loneliness, in this context, was not simply being alone. It was a persistent inability to form reciprocal emotional bonds. From early adolescence, Dahmer showed signs of emotional detachment. Social interaction felt confusing and overwhelming. Connection felt distant and fragile. Psychologically, prolonged loneliness can distort emotional development. When emotional needs are unmet for long periods, the mind may retreat inward. Fantasy replaces relationship. Control replaces intimacy. For Dahmer, fantasy became a refuge. Another key element was emotional numbness. Many individuals with severe personality pathology report feeling emotionally empty. Not sadness, not anger, but a lack of feeling altogether. This internal emptiness can become deeply distressing. For some, stimulation becomes a way to feel something. Dahmer's behavior was driven by compulsion, not impulsivity. Compulsion is repetitive behavior performed to relieve internal tension. It is not about pleasure alone, it is about temporary relief. Psychologically, compulsive behavior narrows awareness and reduces the ability to consider consequences. Over time, the behavior escalates. Dahmer's fantasies centered on possession and permanence. He feared abandonment more than violence. The idea of someone leaving triggered intense psychological distress. This fear transformed into a desire to eliminate autonomy in others, not dominance in a traditional sense, but absolute control over presence. This points to a profound attachment disturbance. In healthy attachment, individuals tolerate separation. They trust continuity even when others are absent. In Dahmer's internal world, separation felt unbearable. The solution his mind created was pathological. Psychiatrically, Dahmer exhibited features consistent with severe personality pathology. These included emotional detachment, lack of empathy, identity diffusion, obsessive fantasy life. However, unlike many offenders, he did not display classic grandiosity or thrill-seeking. His violence was quiet, ritualized, internally focused. Another important mechanism was dissociation. Dissociation allows a person to disconnect from emotional experience during overwhelming situations. In Dahmer's case, dissociation likely reduced emotional response during violent acts. This does not remove responsibility, but it explains how extreme behavior could occur without visible emotional reaction. Dahmer often described feeling disconnected from himself. This internal fragmentation is common in individuals with long-standing emotional neglect. The self becomes divided, a functional outer self, a hidden inner world driven by compulsion. This split reduces internal conflict and allows behavior to continue unchecked. Unlike many offenders, Dahmer did not consistently deny his actions. This has led to confusion. However, acknowledgement does not equal remorse. Psychologically, remorse requires emotional resonance with the suffering of others. Dahmer's admissions were often intellectual, not emotional. Another critical aspect was absence of internal moral regulation. Most people experience guilt as an automatic emotional response. For Dahmer, moral boundaries existed intellectually, not emotionally. Without emotional inhibition, behavior was guided by compulsion rather than conscience. Alcohol also played a role. Substance use can intensify existing psychological vulnerabilities. Alcohol reduced anxiety, lowered inhibition, and blurred internal boundaries. However, it did not create the pathology. It removed what little restraint remained. Dahmer's crimes escalated not because he sought attention, but because compulsion requires escalation. What once relieved tension no longer worked. The cycle demanded more. This is a known pattern in compulsive pathology. Importantly, Dahmer's psychology challenges simplistic explanations. He was not driven by rage alone, nor by ideology, nor by notoriety. His actions emerged from a convergence of extreme loneliness, emotional emptiness, compulsive fantasy, attachment failure, severe personality fragmentation. Understanding Dahmer is not about fascination. It is about recognizing how untreated psychological fragmentation can lead to catastrophic outcomes. Most people who experience loneliness or emotional detachment never become violent, but when multiple risk factors converge without intervention, the results can be devastating. Psychology teaches us that danger does not always appear loud or chaotic. Sometimes it appears silent, disconnected, withdrawn. At Mind Evidence, we examine criminal behavior through psychology, not mythology. This is Mind Evidence, where psychology becomes understanding.